G'day everyone and welcome to video 4.2.9 for the Legal Studies Guy. A pretty short one today as we introduce the Victorian Law Reform Commission. A quote today from an unknown source is, "Knowledge is being aware of what you can do. Wisdom is knowing when not to do it." So I think as we get to this point of the year in year 12, obviously only a little bit to go until the final Saxon exams. It's about having that wisdom, I suppose, to pick and choose what you do. There's lots of things you can do when you're 17, 18. Having that wisdom of knowing when not to do some of it, particularly at this time of year. So as I said, we're introducing the VLRC today. So 4.2.9, the role of the Victorian Law Reform Commission and its ability to influence law reform. We're going to be able to evaluate the ability of law reform bodies to influence a change in the law. So we're going to have to look at how it's effective and how it's not effective. So the essential question is, what role does the VLRC play in law reform? So pretty simply, the Victorian Law Reform Commission is a body that's been created by Parliament. So created by the Victorian Parliament under the Victorian Law Reform Commission Act of 2000. So that's when the VLRC was created. And it's a body that exists independent of Parliament, so an independent body. And basically what will happen is they'll be given a topic to look into by the Attorney General. Sometimes they can look into things of their own volition, but generally they're given a topic by the Attorney General and they conduct research into any existing legislation in that topic, assess whether that legislation is effective or not, whether that legislation needs to change or not, and recommend any changes to that legislation or recommend any future legislation that should be introduced. So this could be, as I said, researching something that there is already existing laws in and working out if those laws need to change and if any new laws need to be brought in, but also researching proposed laws. So researching perhaps a gap in the law. An example of this, and the example that we'll look at in the next slides, is medicinal cannabis or medicinal marijuana in Victoria. So this was an area where there was no law because it was simply illegal, and the VLRC had to research proposed laws, look at jurisdictions overseas, for example, talk to the community to find out what was appropriate, and then recommended the introduction of certain laws to make medicinal cannabis legal in Victoria. The whole idea is that through their process, which we'll look at in a minute, the VLRC will ensure that the legal system and legislation in Victoria meets the needs of the Victorian community. So the Attorney General might identify, okay, this is an area where perhaps we're not meeting the needs. Can you have a look at the VLRC? And the VLRC will find out exactly what the community wants. Their role, as set out by this piece of legislation, is that they have 5 main functions. And as I said, the key one, that first one, is that they make law reform recommendations on matters referred to it by the Attorney General. So the Attorney General gives them something to look at. They look into it, they take their time, might take a year or so, and then they make a list of recommendations. Pretty simple. They can also look into matters of minor matters of general community concern. So they can look into those of their own volition, as I said. And then 3, 4, and 5 are a little bit more general, but just add a little bit more depth to any answer you give about the VLRC. And that is that they can actually ask the Attorney General to refer something to them, so they can suggest a referral. They monitor law reform in Victoria and coordinate it, so they are that peak body for law reform, and there are other law reform bodies. And they also undertake educational programs on any area of law relevant to the reference. So if they're a referred medicinal cannabis one, for example, they may be able to run some educational programs on medicinal cannabis for members of the community. What is the process? So the key thing is we went with number 1 is, if we're looking at major matters, they have to get a referral from the Attorney General. And this referral will include the terms of reference, which is a key term to remember because terms of reference comes up again when we look at royal commissions. So it would include a terms of reference which has the guidelines for what they're looking at, the restrictions basically. These are the boundaries, this is all you're looking at. Medicinal cannabis, for example, made sure the boundaries are in place so that they weren't investigating, legalising cannabis across the board. Very much so that I think the terms of reference, and we'll look at the next slide, were basically use of medicinal cannabis in exceptional circumstances, and then asking them to define what exceptional circumstances were. So they include guidelines, the boundaries, and the date by which the VLRC should report back, which is obviously important to make sure that they conduct their process in a timely manner. Pretty much the first thing they'll do is commission staff will do a bunch of research. They'll look at what the current laws are. They'll look at what laws might be like in other jurisdictions. And they'll draw up a consultation paper. So they basically draw up a paper that has, these are the key questions we're considering, these are the key things we're looking at, and they'll put that out and call for submissions from the public. So it allows the public to have a look at exactly what the key questions are. It allows the public to see exactly what the lay of the land right now is in terms of the law, and therefore make informed submissions about what they think should change. So it's not just some crazy guy writing and being like, I think the law should be this, even though the Commission's not considering that, or even if the law is that already. So it allows the submissions to be actually focused on the work the Commission is intending to do. Then you have the public participation. So this is basically the consultation stage. So once they've looked at what the lay of the land is right now, the VLRC will hold extensive consultation with affected parties, interested members of the community. They might hold public hearings, public meetings, roundtable discussions. They'll receive submissions from the public. If you go online to their website and look at any of their investigations, you'll actually be able to see lists of these public submissions and read them, which can be really interesting. These might come from individuals who are just affected by the current law, or organisations like the Australian Law Reform Body, for example, might send something in, lawyers might send things in, etc., etc. Once they've done all of this consultation, research, gone through all these submissions, talked to these experts, the VLRC will write a report. The reports are pretty massive. They'll be a couple of 100 pages long, but they're actually quite well constructed and quite a good read if you can get your hands on one. And the key thing is that the report will include recommendations for reform. This is a key thing because we are looking at the ability of law reform bodies to contribute to law reform. So here's a great strength of the VLRC is that they will list a set of recommendations. This is what we think you should do. Then that report is tabled within Parliament within 14 sitting days. So it goes into Parliament for everyone to have a look at, and the government then decides whether they'll implement these recommendations or not. They're under no obligation to act. There's no timeline for them to act. They might turn around to the VLRC and say, you know what, great work, thanks, awesome list of recommendations, we don't want to do any of them. The likelihood though is that because they have called for it generally, is that they are then going to take the recommendations on board. Our skill is we need to evaluate the ability of law reform bodies to influence a change in the law, like I just said. And there's a great question from the VCAR sample exam. It looks like this. There are bodies that are more effective than the VLRC in influencing law reform, with reference to either parliamentary committees or royal commissions, because those two are optional. Discuss the extent to which you agree with this statement. So basically this question is asking us to put forward some strengths and weaknesses of the VLRC and put forward some strengths and weaknesses of parliamentary committees or royal commissions, play these off against each other, and then decide, well, is the VLRC actually more effective, or are royal commissions more effective, etc., etc. So what we'll do is, with the next set of slides, we'll run through an example of the VLRC in action, because we need to do that for 4.2.10, and using that example, we'll then look at the strengths and weaknesses of the VLRC. We'll do the same for royal commissions, and then be able to look at constructing an answer to this question, which is one of the 8 markers of the practice exam. Simple link, go to the VLRC website. Absolutely go to the VLRC website. Look at one of the investigations they've done. pull up the report, read the recommendations. You can usually click through and see the government's response as well. They're actually a really, really good read. In conclusion, the role of the Victorian Law Reform Commission and its ability to influence law reform. Hopefully you know the role the VLRC plays in law reform. They'll be referred something from the Attorney General, they'll do a full investigation and present a list of recommendations to Parliament, and the government then chooses whether they'll follow them or not. This has been another video for the Legal Studies guy. We'll see you shortly for the VLRC in action.